Hello,
Hello,
Rania.
everyone. And oh, okay. Are we helloing together? I love that. Hello, Zoe. And hello, everyone who's watching. Welcome to another episode of Breakthrough News Live, here hosted by me and the lovely Zoe Alexandra. Next week, you're going to actually see two live streams. We're going to be doing two
Yes.
live streams a week starting next week. We're very excited about that. Stay tuned for announcements to come with the launch of those two live streams hosted by me and Zoe Alexandra. It'll be on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so tune in next Tuesday, same time, noon Eastern time. I say that also because, again, we've got big announcements to come, so do not miss our Tuesday noon
Big
live
ones.
stream. Big ones, big announcements, guys. Very excited. But for today's show, we have a lot to discuss because, as always, there's so much happening in the world. Nothing that good, unfortunately, but we're going to get into it. Before we do, Zoe, I want to remind our audience that we are an independent media outlet, meaning we don't take money from Larry Ellison or Lockheed Martin. We are actually dependent on those who watch our programs and like them and support us. So if you are able to, please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news, where for as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. But most importantly, you will be supporting independent media that is telling you the truth in a time when we are just surrounded by a tsunami of endless propaganda trying to sell us endless war and trying to convince us that letting billionaires hoard all the wealth is actually a good idea for the world. So patreon.com/breakthrough news if you don't like war and if you think that we should have universal health care. Moreover, if you want to support us during this program, you can actually donate in the live stream. You can also do something very, very simple, which is smash that like button. It helps boost us. There it is. There it is. It helps boost us in the algorithm that sometimes hates us, sometimes doesn't. We don't know what we're getting, but regardless, make sure you're hitting the like button. Make a comment, engage with the content, make sure you're sharing this live stream and all our other shows. Recently was lucky enough to have on the lovely Lara Shihad to talk about the war on our minds. And just to give you a little glimpse of what we're going to be doing today, we've got some great guests coming on the show. We have someone coming to us from Lebanon to talk about the horrific escalation in Lebanon by the Israelis with the green light of the Americans. Really horrible stuff we're seeing out of there, but also ongoing resistance to it. We're also going to be speaking to an expert on the situation, the war, the ongoing, I don't know what to call this at this point, the ongoing negotiations amidst back and forth bombing between the Americans and the Iranians. Though, Zoe, I should say, America bombed Iran yesterday, but it was what they're calling a defensive bombing. Yes,
it was defensive.
Could you imagine if Iran bombed America and called it defensive? Like, and then could you imagine every media outlet just repeating that it was defensive?
Defensive.
Anyways, we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that. We're also going to be speaking to the one and only Medea Benjamin, who was recently or is under attack right now by the U.S. government for delivering humanitarian aid, as well as Hassan Piker. So we're going to be talking to her about that, escalating attack against dissent to U.S. foreign policy inside the most democratic and free country in the world, America.
But democracy.
But before we get to all that, do you have anything you want to add, Zoe, before we get into some of the topics that we're going to discuss before we move to our guests?
I have a big announcement, which is that Rania Khalek turned a birthday yesterday. Had a birthday yesterday.
I turned a birthday.
She turned a birthday yesterday.
I did.
So everyone, I mean, if you love Rania, if you love the show, if you love Breakthrough, if you love all three of those things, now's the time to make that love material. Throw some money in the chat. We'll shout you out. Especially if you send a birthday message for Rania, I will be happy to read it out. I can do voices if you
Ooh.
specify, and that's all available. But happy birthday to Rania, who is our fearless anchor, journalist. We all learned so much from her, and I am personally so honored to be able to work with you, and the most lucky because I'm also your friend. So I am. What to say there?
Not just my friend, you're one of my bestest friends, actually. I feel so I thank you for shouting out my birthday. And I'm not shy about it. I entered my 4th decade yesterday. I am
Hell
now,
yeah.
and now I'm a 40-year-old, even though I know I don't look it. I don't care. I'll say it. I know I don't look it. But 40 is like the new 30, apparently.
Yes.
That's what they say. But also, no, I feel very grateful to have such wonderful people like Zoe in my life. I got to have a really yummy birthday dinner with my family last night. They made me all my favorites. That was exciting. And I feel really excited for what's to come next, especially with Breakthrough. I mean, obviously, like, I eat, sleep, and breathe journalism and politics. So this is a huge part of my life. So I'm honored to get to share my birthday excitement with all our viewers and our audience. And yeah, just excited for what's to come in this next year. I'm taking around the sun on this wild journey called life.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I didn't want to out your age, but I wanted you to do it if you felt comfortable.
I'm not one of those. No, I'm not one of those. I'm not scared to say.
No.
I think it's okay. We all get older. It's normal, and
we embrace it. And we're lucky to get older.
Also, we're lucky to get to live that long, like people used to die because they needed root canals and couldn't get them because there wasn't dentistry.
That's very true. That's very true.
Yay for us.
Good for dentistry. Well, on that note, we have something a little more sinister to talk about than dentistry, although some would argue it's pretty much up there.
Yeah.
But Rania, I know you've been doing a lot of digging on news that had come out, a report that had come out a couple weeks ago about Israel's covert bases in Iraq. So let's start out and hear that.
Yeah, I know, it's pretty wild. This story, I don't think got the attention it deserved, probably because it was Israel and the US behind it.
Right.
But also because of the fact that I think there's just so much other, insanity taking place right now that is hard to wrap your mind around, but we shouldn't let it get buried. The story was revealed a few weeks ago. It's about secret Israeli bases in Iraq. And it's, I think, one of the most outrageous stories to emerge from this entire regional war. And I think also the fact that it's not getting the attention it deserves tells you everything about, how normalized this kind of Israeli and American lawlessness and deception has become. So what happened is there was this shepherd in the Iraqi desert who back in March accidentally discovered a secret Israeli military base that was operating inside Iraq in the western Iraqi desert. Again, this is a secret Israeli base. And what's crazy, I mean, Israel and Iraq, they don't have formal relations, right? The Iraqi population is very hostile to the Israelis because they support Palestine. Like much of the region, by the way, much of the region is very hostile to the settler colonial state that's constantly saying death to Arabs. So, and again, this is also in a place where, not to say it would be okay if it was like in Syria or Lebanon, but those are places where the Israelis are constantly bombing. Right. There have been a few Israeli bombings, I think, inside of Iraq, but it's not common. So to have, a country like Israel that's technically considered an enemy state to be operating not one, but actually two covert bases is insane. And the story just gets crazier the more details that come out about it, because this wasn't like a temporary operation. Israel had apparently spent over a year preparing this covert military infrastructure on Iraqi soil to support a future operation against Iran. According to the New York Times, and I think also the Wall Street Journal, this had been something that was started by the Israelis in 2024 and officially became operational in 2025 ahead of the 12-day war last year. They had helicopters, right? This wasn't just like 2 cars hiding in the desert. They had helicopters, they had landing strips, they had commandos and tents and medical support and refueling operations. So this was an entire clandestine military outpost, again, hidden in Iraq's western desert without the permission or even the knowledge of the Iraqi state. And Iraqi officials later confirmed that there was actually also a second Israel, again, secretly operating military bases inside another sovereign country without that country's public knowledge or its consent, which is an act of aggression and a violation of sovereignty. And frankly, if any other country had done this, if Iran, let's say, because we always hear about Iran is violating the sovereignty of every state in the world, apparently. This would be like Iran having secret military bases inside like Mexico or Canada to prepare attacks for the US. Which is insane, right? Like American media would be screaming at the top of their lungs that this is an act of war if that was the case. But, because it's Israel, the reaction is just kind of like, oh, like this is an interesting and wild security development. Let's move on. And then the story gets darker, by the way. That's not even where it ends. The reason this operation was exposed at all is, again, because this Iraqi shepherd, 29-year-old guy named Awad al-Shamari, accidentally stumbled across this base while he was driving through the desert to buy groceries. So this guy's on a grocery run in the Iraqi desert because he's, part of a Bedouin community. Leaves to go buy groceries, accidentally stumbles upon this international covert military operation. And then according to witnesses and Iraqi officials, he contacts the Iraqi military authorities to report what he'd seen, right? Soldiers, helicopters, tents, military activity around a landing strip, super suspicious stuff. And then you know what happens afterwards, Zoe? He's hunted down by an Israeli helicopter and murdered. This helicopter chases his pickup truck across the desert, repeatedly fires on him until his vehicle is destroyed. And then later his burned body is found beside, the charred remains of his truck. And again, zero outrage. They murdered a guy, just like this shepherd, on his land because he reported their covert military base to the Iraqi authorities. This is a civilian shepherd killed for discovering a secret foreign military installation inside his country, right? It's just wild. So again, I just want to say, I know I'm not trying to sound like a broken record, but I just feel like the only way for people to understand how outrageous this is if we make comparisons. So imagine if Russia had done this, or China had done this somewhere, or again, if Iran had done this, we would never hear the end of it. But I bet most people kind of either maybe saw a headline about this or didn't even know it happened. So this is what I think, it got dark, gets a little bit crazier because the scandal doesn't end there because it's not just Israel, it's the US. According to Iraqi officials and former American officials that are quoted in these Western media reports, they are like, there's no way that the Pentagon or CENTCOM didn't know these Israeli bases existed. Absolutely no chance. The U.S. military, of course, we know has massive infrastructure across Iraq. Iraqi airspace is heavily monitored. American-Israeli militaries coordinate closely on everything in the region. There's no way the Americans didn't know this. And a former American military commanders literally said they used the word inconceivable for Washington not to know, which means one of two things happened here. Either the U.S. deliberately concealed the Israeli operations from Iraq, which I believe to be the case, and both of these might be true, or some people in Iraq's leadership knew and helped cover it up, or just stayed silent about it, which is essentially the same thing. Both possibilities could be true, but definitely the American one for sure is true. And remember, Iraq's supposed to be a sovereign state, right? But I think this story also exposes that Iraq remains trapped under these overlapping systems of American domination and Israeli military penetration. And actually, Zoe, it's even crazier because the Iraqi military even asked their American counterparts for information about this suspicious military activity that was seen in the desert, and they got no answer. And at some point, the Americans had convinced the Iraqis to basically turn off their own radar systems, saying it was for their own protection. So anyways, the other thing I want to mention is that this is also like there's also this constant situation with Iraq where the Americans are constantly complaining about Iranian infiltration in Iraq and Iranian violations of Iraqi sovereignty. Yet again, they're involved in this and, of course, not a peep about it. And again, I want to go back to the fact, like, I think it's crazy that the U.S. literally compelled Iraq to shut down its own radar systems to protect American aircraft. But now they're saying, oh, this was probably so that they wouldn't notice the Israeli activity, the Israeli covert bases taking place. So I really wanted to tell that story because it exposes how much international law doesn't matter, how much the U.S. just violates sovereignty with total impunity, and then complains about, Iran violating sovereignty. It's just pure projection. And, it exposes a devastating reality that countries like Iraq are still living under the aftershocks of invasion and occupation decades after the fact. This is not a free and sovereign country. If they can't even, if their people literally get hunted down and killed for discovering a foreign country operating a covert base.
No, I mean, it's ridiculous. And it can kind of, I feel like people, it doesn't necessarily register always. But Rania, you've actually reported from on the ground in Iraq. I don't know if our viewers know that, but you've actually seen the conditions there. What it means to live after, 2 decades of a U.S. invasion and military occupation. It's not when people talk about the U.S. starting wars in other countries, I mean, the reality of Iraq is the aftermath of that.
No, absolutely. And like, anyways, it's also just insane because being in Lebanon most of the year, because where I live right now, I happen to not be there. You literally constantly, it's constant from the Americans, this idea of like the sovereignty of other countries, the sovereignty of the region from Iran. And then everything is just completely hypocritical and outrageous. And I think that this story really demonstrates that. And yes, having been in Iraq, it's like the country, you don't heal or come out of an invasion and occupation that killed like over 1 million people, even over 20 years later. Like they're still dealing with the aftermath of that. And the Americans are still interfering in the country. And even just during this recent war with Iran, they were constantly bombing Iraq and bombing the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Forces that helped fight ISIS, saying they're connected to Iran. So just still trying to like overthrow the Iraqi security apparatus after they've already thrown the Iraqi security apparatus. It's just never ending aggression and imperialism. But Zoe, on that note, I do want to move on to our first guest. And this is very much in keeping with a lot of what we're talking about, because we're going to go to Lebanon here, because Israel's war on Lebanon continues to intensify despite the so-called ceasefire. For those who haven't, been paying attention to the news out of there, Israel just issued orders for all of South Lebanon. That means they ordered the residents of 14% of the country to leave their homes or basically die. That includes over 300 villages. They demanded they flee north of the Zerani River or risk being killed, which is, not even south of the Litani anymore. They've moved even more north than that. And since March 2nd, when this escalation began, Israel has killed more than 3,100 people in Lebanon. That includes around 700 people since the ceasefire supposedly went into effect on April 17th. That includes health workers and journalists, entire villages wiped out, tens of thousands of homes destroyed, more than 1 million people displaced. This is happening during a so-called ceasefire. It's such a joke to even use that term. And at the same time, we have Israeli officials openly discussing plans to permanently empty parts of South Lebanon and settle those areas with Israeli Jews eventually. And this is even as the Israeli and Lebanese military officials are set to meet at the Pentagon tomorrow for a fourth round of talks. And again, this is unfolding alongside negotiations, which I just mentioned. But it's important to note that this is also happening amidst negotiations between the U.S. and Iran that increasingly appear tied to Lebanon's future. The Iranians insisting that Lebanon must be included in any broader regional settlement. And of course, Israel and its allies furious at the idea of losing their freedom to continue bombing Lebanon. And then inside Lebanon, you have factions aligned with Washington who are once again being accused of treating Israeli military pressure as a way to basically weaken their political opponents inside Lebanon after failing to defeat them politically, meaning Hezbollah. So to discuss all of this, we're joined by Hussein Assaf, journalist with VPol based in Lebanon. Hussein, welcome back to Breakthrough News Live.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, there's so much to get into here, Hussein, but I want to start with a recent report by Al-Akhbar that said that Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam and President Joseph Aoun are working behind the scenes to keep Lebanon out of a potential U.S.-Iran settlement, essentially so they can continue their direct negotiations with the Israelis and then deny Hezbollah and by extension Iran the political credibility of securing a ceasefire for Lebanon. And, you know, this really echoes, as you know, what happened in 2006 when anti-resistance political elites inside Lebanon privately were urging the U.S. to delay a ceasefire so that Israel could deal a quote-unquote bigger blow to Hezbollah. So what do you make of this reporting and how is it being received inside Lebanon?
While there's no, I haven't seen many reports on that, but all indications suggest that this is true. The performance of the government, primarily the prime minister and the president, has been toward that since they took offices in early 2025. And I would just want to remind something that in 2024, after the ceasefire, the Israeli occupation forces during the entire war were not able to advance in southern Lebanon. All their advancement and all the demolitions that we saw in the past 15 or 16 months happened following the ceasefire, which the prime minister and the president, to an extent, pushed to. Because, as you know, the ceasefire that was supposedly mediated by the United States also made the Israelis commit to withdrawing from Lebanon to end the land, air, and sea aggressions, which none of that happened. So what's happening today, especially when it comes to direct talks with the Israelis, that is being pushed by the US, by the Lebanese president, and secondary to him, the prime minister, is just a completion of that same path, of that same direction. The Israelis and the United States today see that this is a golden opportunity to end the resistance in Lebanon and to create Lebanon into another settlement that is fully subjugated to the Israeli occupation and to the United States, especially following the ongoing genocide in Gaza, really. And after failing to achieve their war objectives so far in Iran, both Israel and the United States are trying to come out as some sort of victory on one of the fronts. And here it's very important to say that both the Lebanese president and the prime minister are irrelevant to the situation that's happening now. They are merely proxies acting on behalf of the United States and in complicity or alignment, at least, with the Israeli objective. However, everything they're doing, we can't say that they are doing without full knowledge or without any kind of will, because after all, they are violating the Lebanese constitution, which labels the Israelis our enemy. They are pushing for civil war in Lebanon by alienating a large percentage of its population. They are, to an extent, enabling the Israeli war crimes in Lebanon by choosing to continue down the path of meeting with Israelis without enforcing any kind of precondition to these meetings related to ending the war in Lebanon. So all in all, everything that's happening is a continuation of the 2024 war on Lebanon, which also is continued by the Prime Minister and the Lebanese President.
Well, Hussein, it's interesting that you say that the U.S. and Israel are sort of scrounging around to try to get a victory on one of the fronts. And at the same time that Israel has been able to inflict enormous destruction on Lebanon, and we just read through those numbers of the death toll, which is really horrific, 700 since the supposed ceasefire. But at the same time, Israel has not achieved its core objective, which it has stated on numerous occasions, which is to defeat or disarm Hezbollah. And recently, reporting emerged that Hezbollah also perhaps injured the commander of the Israeli unit that was implicated in the killing of Hind Rajab when they were in operations in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah seems to be capable of sophisticated operations and targeting of senior Israeli personnel. Again, despite a lot of destruction, demolition of homes, etc. How do you assess Israel's military performance in Lebanon, and what role are newer tactics, especially the FPV drones and other technologies, playing on the battlefield? Does this challenge Israel's claim that it now has achieved deterrence in Lebanon with regards to Hezbollah?
This is usual in asymmetric warfare, especially when you're talking about resistance. This can be measured by the amount of damage and destruction. After all, Israel is an entity that is openly supported by the United States, by the West, by NATO, when it comes to open supplies of weaponry, open supplies of intelligence, and a political umbrella which enables them to do everything. So in that sense, the amount of destruction can be easily done when you have an air force such as Israelis, the amount of explosives that they have, whether on the level of demolition when they go into towns or airstrikes. So in that sense, if you go back to between the 1982 and the 2000 liberation of southern Lebanon, which was achieved by the resistance, Israelis had the upper hand. The resistance was composed of hundreds of men in southern Lebanon that decided that this is not acceptable to live under occupation, and they wanted a sovereign country. And so they started employing guerrilla warfare tactics with weaponry very much less than we are seeing today with the resistance. And they eventually achieved the 2000 liberation by going into attrition war against Israelis, by raising the costs, by on the army and on the political class, and when it comes to the Israeli public. So the amount of destruction here, while is extremely painful, but resistance was always a choice, and everyone knew the sacrifices that should be made, whether on the level of Hezbollah as fighters or the level of the support base, which is one of the largest in Lebanon in terms of voter base. That's one. Two, I think that what resistance is doing today is practically just authentic guerrilla warfare. They are choosing their targets to inflict maximum damage when it comes to on the psychological level or the command level or even the military costs, as we saw the Merkavas and other. Secondly, they are using it widely because today the resistance is dealing with the war that it might not stop soon. So they are using the resources very wisely. Whenever they don't need to defend a town ferociously, they would retreat and let Israelis into ambushes to raise the cost on them without suffering from a large number of martyrs or destruction of capabilities. So what we're seeing today is normal. The question is how long Israelis are able to sustain these losses or sustain these the number of casualties on the military level, and when it comes to the Israeli political class, given the issues with the Knesset today and the subject of dissolvement and the upcoming elections in November, which could be also in September as early elections. So these questions are today the main issue in Israel. Israeli media reported just today that the Hezbollah's operations in Lebanon are inflicting very high level of cost on the Israeli army. Of course, there's two aspects for the increasing Israeli reports about the losses. One is we can assume that it's the Israeli military and intelligence trying to force the political class into giving them more freedom of operations, if you might say, without restrictions to bomb areas, especially in Beirut. However, the political class is seeing this as there's a fine line between what they're trying to do and what Washington is approving, because as you know, there's the negotiations today with Iran. So while Hezbollah is extremely successful, Israelis are also advancing on the ground, and this is not something that anyone can hide. But the question is, how costly would it be, and how much they are able to sustain it?
And with that, Hussein, I wanna go back to the sort of things happening inside Lebanon, because we've seen Secretary of State of the U.S. Marco Rubio say that the U.S. wants to train and arm special units inside the Lebanese army to confront and attack Hezbollah. And then we also saw recent news with the Americans now sanctioning Lebanese individuals that include even Lebanese army officials they're accusing of being too close to Hezbollah. There's also been this campaign by people in the U.S. and some inside Lebanon too to pressure the Lebanese government to remove army leadership figures who have resisted so far, dragging the country into an internal conflict and using the army to do basically Israel's dirty work, to fight and try to disarm Hezbollah. So I'm curious, how dangerous is this American effort to basically try to transform parts of the Lebanese army into a force aimed at confronting Hezbollah internally? And how serious is the risk of the U.S. pushing Lebanon towards internal conflict?
It's very important what you mentioned right now, and I want to expand a bit before, as some kind of small introduction before going into it. The Lebanese architecture, or the Lebanese political architecture today, is very unsimilar to what we're used to. You have a president that has no party behind him, who has no support base. We have a prime minister who also has no party and no support base. And as you know, Rania, one of the prerequisites of any president or prime minister is their support base and the amount of support base, and they're usually some kind of national consensus between different parties in Lebanon. But today the situation is different. I think if you go back to the statements made by Tom Barak in the past year and Lindsey Graham on what they view as the mission of the Lebanese army, which is to confront Hezbollah rather than protect the state from the Israeli aggression or any kind of other threats, you can also see that there is a change in the mindset of the United States when it comes to the de facto architecture that has been the convention in the past few decades, especially since following the civil war in Lebanon. So what's essentially happening today between the Israeli forced displacement order pushing the Shias, or who are mostly the resistance support base in Lebanon, toward areas that are not, there's no political alignment between them. And when you see how much the United States is trying to push for the Lebanese army unit, which the Lebanese commander has been trying to avoid since he reached his position. He was trying to create a margin where he could act he would implement the orders of the political class without pushing the country into civil war. So this conventional era of Lebanon is being changed right now. And I think many people yesterday saw the forced displacement order that was issued to Sur or Tyre. You could notice that there's a small part of the city that was not part of the forced displacement order, which is very interesting. This part of the city is known to be as a Christian area. The Christians, it's dominantly Christian, and they have, of course, they're part of Sur, but there they have their churches. They have, it goes hundreds of years back of between the architecture and the norms and the culture, etc. And they've lived side by side with all the Sur community and the population, which is very diverse. However, you see, as what they're doing in the border villages, where they're trying to say that we are sidelining the Christian areas, and what our aim is the Shia community. They're trying to create this alienation between the Lebanese public among different sects, which obviously we know how the Israelis treat Christians. We can see it. And we saw it even in southern Lebanon when they desecrated Lady Mary's statue. They bombed the churches. I've seen it in Gaza. We've seen it in the occupied Al-Quds. So this is part of the failed propaganda. However, inside Lebanon, with many of the U.S.-aligned political parties, this could be a trigger into an internal conflict. I don't want to call it a civil war yet, because the most powerful party in Lebanon when it comes to organization structure and weapons is the resistance. So far, despite them trying to push for a civil war, I don't think that the decision to go into civil war would be actually the U.S. would be able to push others into it, because that would be suicide. But of course, this does not stop the U.S. from trying to cause any kind of internal conflict that might result in the spilling of the blood among the Lebanese citizens themselves.
Yeah, and of course there are Lebanese people who are often in the U.S., people like Edwin Sahnawi, who I wanted to ask you about, but we're a bit out of time here, so we'll have to leave it for next time, but who are, of course, playing a role internally in the country to try to push that sort of sectarian propaganda that you're talking about. It's quite dangerous and damaging stuff, but we will have to leave it here for this time around. Hussein, thank you so much for joining us. I encourage everybody to go check out VPol on Instagram. You guys do excellent segments and just constant updates and reportings on what's going on in Lebanon. And hopefully we can get you back on soon. Stay safe out there.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the situation in Lebanon, you guys, just super, super horrific, intense, and just awful to watch the same thing happen over and over again. And the sort of disgusting criminal behavior by the Israelis backed by the U.S. just spreading because, impunity in Gaza and now impunity in Lebanon. Right. I recently saw a clip of former Israeli spy Jonathan Pollard saying after Iran, Turkey, and Egypt are next. This is a country, the Israelis want a region that is completely weak and unstable. They want all the countries around them to be weak, unstable, and in ruin. That is what the Greater Israel Project means today. It isn't just expanding its borders. Right. It's also making everyone around them too weak and too unstable to ever present any sort of challenge in any way to Israeli domination and U.S. domination of the region. And with that, we're going to turn to Iran, which has obviously been in the crosshairs, been the subject of a horrific war of aggression by the Americans and Israelis. And, the Persian Gulf is once again on the brink, despite there being a supposed ceasefire in place now after the U.S. launched fresh new strikes yesterday on Iran. And then
defensive,
Iran retaliated
Rania.
This time. Defensive, right? Defensive strikes. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Big Brother. Defensive strikes. But no, I mean, it's actually wild. The ceasefire has been in place for a couple months now. And this is the second time in the course of a week, I believe, that the U.S. has launched strikes on Iran, but calling it defensive, saying it's not actually an end to the ceasefire. There's still a ceasefire in place. And Iran this time retaliated against Kuwait. As they have done before, they retaliated against the UAE. And this is happening even as negotiations continue over a possible framework to end this disastrous war. Meanwhile, as we just talked about, Israel has intensified its attacks on Lebanon, raising further doubts about whether Washington is willing or able to restrain Netanyahu as part of any broader regional settlement. So, where do talks stand? Is this genuine diplomacy, or is it just the U.S. buying time to recalibrate before the next round? And how close is the region to spiraling into a much wider war? Joining us to discuss is Omar Baddar, Palestinian-American political analyst based in Washington, D.C. Omar, thank you so much for joining us. It's good to see you.
Absolutely. Always good to be with you.
So let's jump right into it, because man, it just feels like we're trapped in in some kind of time loop, right? Because, 1 hour we hear negotiations are moving in a positive direction. The next hour we hear threats of escalation and, civilizational apocalyptic destruction. Then suddenly the U.S. is bombing Iran again while insisting diplomacy is still on course and ceasefire is still alive. So, yeah, it feels like we're just trapped in this endless cycle of negotiations and military escalation that's just happening simultaneously. So, Omar, how should we interpret these contradictory developments? Is there actually a coherent U.S. strategy here?
I don't think there's a coherent strategy at all. I think what we're witnessing right now is President Trump flailing. He knows he doesn't have any good options at this stage. You remember he came in promising complete and total Iranian surrender. He said that's the only condition for ending the war. It would mean no more ballistic missiles, no more Iranian alliance with any regional allies that they have, possibly toppling the Iranian government and replacing it with a more pro-US and Israel-friendly government. None of this is on the table. Trump understands that none of this is on the table. So now he's stuck in a situation where either he accepts terms that would essentially be humiliating for Trump because it would be obvious for everyone that he did not achieve any of his goals and is going to allow Iran sanctions relief and the ability to rebuild itself without having completely cowed to his demands, or the alternative is a continuing war whose economic consequences for the U.S. are completely unacceptable, devastating the American economy, gas prices shooting up, potentially shortages in all sorts of stuff in the near future if this keeps going, and a very likelihood that Trump's Republican Party would lose the midterm elections. Those are the choices, and Trump does not know what to do. Now, I think that Trump's probably leaning in the direction, if it were up to him personally, of just settling this entire situation, of accepting a deal and trying to essentially sell it as a win, even though it's not, and hoping that people buy that. But he's also surrounded by a lot of people who want this war to continue. The Israel lobby, Senator Lindsey Graham, and the list goes on, of people who see this as a strategic defeat for the United States and insisting on the delusion that just a little bit more pressure or a little bit more killing is going to change the outcome here. And that is simply a fool's errand. But again, with somebody whose ego is inflated as Trump, it might not be that difficult to play to his ego and say, this will be embarrassing. The only option that you have is to keep going. And that might actually sway him. So I think it's very, very difficult to actually figure out which direction we're moving in. But it's obvious from everything that we've seen that Trump does not know what to do.
Well, interesting you mentioned that, Omar, because last weekend when it was announced that a deal might be possible, immediately after we saw warmongers, going out in force in Israel, and even, supporters in Washington. And it was striking because Democrats also joined in on attacking Trump, essentially mocking him for making any compromises in diplomatic negotiations with Iran. And we want to show a couple clips that can illustrate this point. First up, Debbie Wasserman Schultz and her displeasure with negotiations.
I am concerned and frustrated over, again, another potential deal, a negotiation for a negotiation where we're going to unfreeze Iranian assets and give them billions of dollars to be able to control proxies again and to rebuild their ballistic missile program, never mind their drone program, which is incredibly deadly, and they've been increasing their drone capability. So this is deeply concerning. And look, I'm glad that Iran, their capability militarily has been degraded. But if what we get from this initial deal is just going back to where we were before, where Iran did not control the Strait of Hormuz, then what has been accomplished?
Interesting. And one more before we get your reaction, which is our other friend from the state of New Jersey, Cory Booker.
Well, already the president's balance sheet is letting more than $14 billion go through, that during this conflict he allowed them to sell oil. And this deal alone, easing of sanctions on Iran, allowing them to get billions of more, the same deal he criticized, he's already doing worse than. Giving Iran more money, as he has said, will allow them to do things like fuel their terrorist proxies. That's why this war is wrong. He's got us in a situation that's worse than it was before, a more extreme regime. The Strait of Hormuz now is a leveraging point for them. This weak nation has put America in a stalemate. And Donald Trump is being played as a fool that he is for getting us into this in the first place.
Well, it's interesting because also they seem to kind of say the same thing. But can you talk a little bit about the bipartisan nature of the war machine in this country? They seem to have zero concern about economic consequences of the war, not only in Iran, but also at home, the danger of regional escalation, or even the simple fact that the majority of people in the United States are opposed to this war.
Yeah, there's absolutely a bipartisan consensus on this as far as the establishment is concerned. I want to make sure that this is very, very different than the American population. It's obvious the public opinion polling has moved in a very significantly different direction, particularly on the Democratic base. I mean, there's movement on the Republican side as well. But when Debbie Wasserman Schultz talks about how we're allowing them to have billions and all the terrible things, it never occurs to her that we not only allow Israel to have billions, we literally give that from American taxpayers' money directly to that genocidal apartheid regime. And they're carrying out mass terrorism with it left and right. It simply does not occur to them, despite the fact that the American population is awake at this point. What they've seen over the past few years has completely opened their eyes. There is wall-to-wall opposition right now to essentially continuing this absurd relationship that we have with Israel, where you just give them unlimited funding, unlimited diplomatic support, and they just commit atrocities. And this is all money that, frankly, even if you don't care about Palestinians or Lebanese or Iranians, money that should be spent at home in the United States. Americans are, one of very few developed countries that can't have universal health care. We don't provide child care. There isn't a proper safety net. And to constantly hear from our politicians that we don't have money for all the things that Americans need, but we somehow always have money for Israel's wars in the region is utterly insane. And, for a certain segment of the pro-war machine on the Democratic side, their problem is that Trump is prosecuting the war wrong. It's not that he's waging the war in the first place. What they worry about here is a diminishing of U.S. empire, and they're nervous that Trump is not handling it well, and they wish somebody could do it better, as opposed to a genuine critique of our entire relationship with the region. That if you're interested in genuinely a stable region in which you can, in fact, protect American interests in the long term, that is a completely different relationship that is not based on dominance, but it is simply out of the question for the political establishment in this country right now. We're still operating in a mode in which our job is to impose our will on the region. Israel is effectively the tool in some ways that, our job is to support them, make the region subservient, and any opposition to that is something to be feared. Well, that's not a recipe for long-term stability or for U.S. interest in the long term, because you're going to constantly have a region that is just seething at the injustice of your policies. And you can build a very, very different kind of relationship if you have a genuine relationship of cooperation. And that would have to start with putting the reins on that terrorist genocidal regime in the region that is just bombing everybody with complete and total impunity. We need a fundamental change in American policy. And it's just incredibly depressing to see how out of touch the Democratic establishment continues to be. Although there are plenty of signs of movement with the way that certain local and state elections are going. That wake-up call, I think, is inevitable at this point. It's just a question of how much more time is going to pass, how many more Palestinians and Lebanese and Iranians and others are going to die while we sit here and wait for that policy change. I think we still have a responsibility to push for it as strongly as we can.
Yeah, and to what you're saying, I mean, Lebanon is a real test case, which I think is why Iran has made it, such a major centerpiece of its demands is a ceasefire in Lebanon, because it's a test case on, are the Americans willing to rein in the Israelis, even if it's just to stop the Israelis from bombing. They're not even saying stop bombing all of Lebanon. They're actually just saying right now a red line is Beirut and the southern suburbs. And today we saw the Israelis bombed the southern suburbs of Beirut. And they did that obviously with a green light from the Americans. So it's a test case for Iran, because if the Americans can't rein in the Israelis on Lebanon, how is Iran supposed to expect the Americans to rein in the Israelis on Iran? Because this is supposed to be the war to end all the wars on Iran. So we'll see how that plays out. But I do want to ask you about the Gulf states, because, we've seen in these repeated cycles of U.S. strikes on Iran that what follows is Iranian retaliation by targeting areas connected to American military presence in the Gulf, right? And so that raises huge questions about the role of the Gulf monarchies hosting U.S. bases while also trying to avoid being dragged into regional war. And, the UAE seems like fine with it for some reason, but the rest of the Gulf states are now really questioning how they should navigate this moment, and what their relationship, should be moving forward into the future. I mean, one of Iran's demands has been, they've kind of like relented a little bit, that these bases can no longer be in the Gulf states because they're obviously being used to attack Iran. I mean, that's probably not going to happen. However, what do you see, moving forward in this kind of reconfiguration of the region when it comes to the relationship between the Gulf states and the U.S.?
It's hard to say. What is obvious, I think, from as you pointed out, is that the relationship cannot go back to what it was over the past years. We're at a very, very major turning point, and different forces in the Gulf are pulling in different directions, frankly. I think the same portion of the Gulf understands what a horrible idea all of this has been, understands how damaging it's been, and they're desperate for a way out of this war. But you have a more hawkish wing, like in the UAE, that sees an end to this war that leaves Iran intact as a regional force to be unacceptable. They have thrown their lot completely with Israel on this one. They're in an unprecedented alliance that we've never seen between an Arab country and Israel. And they're insisting, what they would prefer here is seeing this war all the way to its end, even if it means significantly more damage in the UAE. They view that as a price worth paying. I think that's complete and total insanity. There is a delusion there about what is possible and how it would play out. But yeah, there's not going to be a return to the relationship between the Gulf and the United States that we've seen before all of this, simply because the U.S. has proven that it is unable to protect those countries. We saw overwhelmingly all the air defenses move to Israel to protect Israel and essentially abandoning the Gulf. And then Trump comes on the back of that and says any deal with Iran, the payback from the Gulf has to be that they have to all collectively normalize relations with Israel and follow the Abraham Accords, the so-called peace deal that is anything but a peace deal. It's essentially an arms deal between governments that already have a tacit alliance under the table with Israel, trying to declare that and sell it as a peace deal, even though it has actually made war inevitably much more likely, and it hasn't, as it has in fact played out. I think it has to be a moment of reckoning for the Gulf, especially with somebody like Trump in power, seeing how reckless he is. He was just talking recently about possibly blowing up Oman if they try to, have an arrangement in the Straits without that they don't approve of. I mean, that's, again, yes, of course, the U.S. has significant leverage over these countries that have decided to essentially use the U.S. as protection. That's the relationship that they have. But they will not accept bullying on that level. This is simply an extremely loud wake-up call that if Trump's idea is to essentially treat them like servants and to declare that openly, that you do what we tell you to do, obviously these countries, if they're looking out for their own interests, are going to be looking for different options and a different configuration that does not leave them completely dependent on the whims of a completely reckless and lunatic U.S. president.
Yeah, and then there's also the Israel factor I just want to throw out here too, because, we talk a lot about greater Israel. And when we think of the idea of greater Israel, it's often thought of as this like expanding of the borders and expanding settlements, into Gaza, taking over the West Bank, taking over South Lebanon and parts of Syria, which is absolutely true. And what, the sort of messianic zealots who are in charge of big parts of the Israeli government ultimately want to do. However, there's also this aspect of greater Israel that is about weakening every single state in the region, collapsing in some form or sort of dismantling or chopping up, into smaller states so that they're too weak to ever pose any sort of like economic or military challenge to Israeli hegemony across the region. And we hear it increasingly in Israeli rhetoric. Particularly, I think we've heard it the most about, after Iran, Turkey is next. And we've even heard some rumblings about, and then Saudi Arabia. And now, I was talking earlier about this clip I saw before we started recording of the former, of the Israeli spy, Jonathan Pollard, who literally gave U.S. intelligence secrets to the Israelis. Nuclear secrets, I believe. But anyways, he was on some program in Israel talking about how next is Turkey and then Egypt. And I think, if you're these Gulf states or really any state in the region, even if you've normalized with the Israelis, except for maybe the UAE, it does seem like a lot of these countries for their own self-interest, not because they care about Palestinians or Lebanese or whatever, but for their own self-interest, are increasingly recognizing that Israel as it exists today, in this sort of messianic Zionist, most aggressive form it exists in, poses a threat in some shape or form to everyone.
Absolutely. And obviously we're in the midst of a very depressing regional situation, but I do want to end things on a bit of a high note. And I see a flicker of light here in that I think that the reason why Israel is behaving in a completely deranged way right now is because they see the clock is ticking on American support. They thought they had an opportunity in the aftermath of October 7th to literally commit genocide while the world watches and applauds. And that is not how it turned out. Despite living in the United States, where the media establishment and the political establishment essentially did cover up what Israel was doing and try to put it in a positive light, it is simply not the way people consume information anymore. That you have people throughout the entire world getting access to the real images of what was unfolding in Gaza and having a much deeper and more sophisticated political understanding of the events as they were unfolding, that you could no longer hide what Israel was doing, that they're used to having this massive propaganda machine that can essentially always present Israel as the only democracy in the Middle East and the source for, freedom and human rights and all that. All of that is gone. It is over. And the extent to which American public opinion is shifting, I think Israel sees that they have a short window of opportunity, certainly guaranteed as long as Trump is president, but completely unclear how much beyond that, where they can behave with impunity, counting on American military funding to continue. And because the clock is ticking on that, they are trying to do as much damage as possible. They are trying to defeat all of their regional adversaries, and they're trying to get rid of as many Palestinians and as many Lebanese as they possibly can in order to remake that region so that they can potentially stand on their own and continue as a dominant force after U.S. support collapses. I don't think they're going to be able to do it. I mean, just look at what's happening in South Lebanon right now. Just an endless stream of footage coming out from the south of Israeli tanks being blown up day after day. And of course, the Israeli response, unsurprisingly, is to massacre journalists and medics and children and blowing up civilian infrastructure. It is the Gaza playbook. And Smotrich himself just essentially said that explicitly. Smotrich, the Israeli finance minister, proposed that for every soldier hurt in South Lebanon by a Hezbollah drone, that Israel should flatten 100 buildings throughout Lebanon. Now, if Osama bin Laden had said, for every al-Qaeda member that you kill, we're going to take down 100 buildings in New York, everybody would understand that as terrorism. There would be no confusion about it. And yet, Israeli officials are speaking this openly about the mass terrorism they're imposing. And we don't still recognize the Israeli government as a terrorist organization, which it absolutely is. And I think that's completely bonkers. And Americans are fed up with it, and change is absolutely coming. We are enduring the darkest hour in a way, but I have no doubt that the coming years are going to be much better than the ones we're witnessing right now.
Yeah, and I'm sure that the Israelis and all of the warmongers we saw throw a hissy fit over the weekend are now going to throw another one, because recent reports say that the White House is confirming initial reporting from Axios that there's a memorandum of understanding that the president still hasn't signed, but it's a 60-day ceasefire. The Strait of Hormuz would be reopened. Iran would promise to clear all mines within 30 days and pledge not to build a nuclear weapon. And the U.S. would discuss relief and unfreezing Iran. We'll see what it looks, in the next hour from now, the Americans do another defensive strike. But we'll continue to monitor the situation. Omar, really appreciate your analysis. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always good to be with you, Rania. Take care, guys.
I mean,
well, there we have it. We're stuck in the same time loop, Zoe. I mean,
Stuck in the
literally,
same time
you
loop.
could see it another hour from now. It'll be the U.S. actually says never mind, but we'll see. I mean, this war, for the sake of the global economy, needs to end. But that would mean that Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Cory Booker need to calm the hell down about unfreezing Iranian assets and maybe compromise a little bit.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Also because they basically say, like, they justify U.S. imperialism. They're like, we have control over a sovereign country's assets, and we have the right to freeze them just because. It's
Right.
like actually ridiculous. But I wanted to make a very quick point before we go to our next story, Rania, and I think it's that I'm really glad Omar brought up the point of, ending on a point of optimism, because I think it's hard to remember that in the past 2.5 years, while we've witnessed so much horrific suffering and destruction and killing and death and assassinations, what we've witnessed across the world is also like earth-shattering. New York City used to be considered like a Zionist stronghold, etc. It is now the city where like you cannot go a day without seeing some Palestine protest. People completely shifted their entire lives to join the movement for Palestine. They occupied their universities. They joined actions blocking bridges. I mean, people's entire view on the world and how the world works has been shifted in the past 2.5 years. University occupations and encampments took place in Argentina, in Brazil, in Belgium, in the UK. I mean, really across the world. We covered protests that were happening across the African continent for Palestine, across Southeast Asia. Like, truly, I think it's really important that as we're living this period of like such devastation and loss, that we also remember that the world is not the same that it was, and that the way that people's consciousness has changed, the way that they understand politics and their desire to change the world so that a genocide cannot happen again is so powerful. And, in these moments, we just have to remember that.
No, that shouldn't be dismissed or like taken for granted.
Yeah.
Because yes, like it's like right now everything is really horrible and it feels that way. And I do encourage people to go check out my latest episode of Dispatches with Lara Shiha, who just wrote a book on basically like we cannot give in to defeatism and depression and hopelessness because that's exactly what they want. That's a part of their war. And also not giving into that means recognizing exactly what you just said for what it is and the importance it holds. And in the tradition of holding up all of the activism that's been done and all of the resistance taking place against these endless wars that are destroying so many countries, we'll go ahead and move on to our next story and our next guest. Many of you may have seen Fox News reporting earlier in the week that the Treasury Department sent subpoenas to Code Pink co-founder Medea Benjamin and Twitch streamer Hassan Piker as part of an investigation into a humanitarian delegation that brought much needed aid to Cuba in March. Now, that delegation traveled to Cuba as the country was facing and continues to face severe life-threatening shortages and blackouts caused by the Trump administration's fuel blockade and sanctions campaign against the island nation. Critics say that this is part of the administration's crackdown on anti-war and left-wing activism inside the United States. Joining us to discuss what's going on here is Medea Benjamin herself, the co-founder of Code Pink. Medea, welcome back to Breakthrough News.
Nice to be on with you.
Well, I wish it was under better circumstances, but this is just such a wild story, and you are, of course, at the center of it, Medea. So can you tell us, what exactly happened here? Because there were some conflicting reports initially about whether you had personally received an actual subpoena or just questions about an ongoing investigation. So can you clarify what was sent to you, what this investigation is supposedly about, and what exactly the U.S. government appears to be, and Fox News, I guess, appears to be accusing you and others of doing?
I actually didn't get anything, and neither did Hassan Piker. I mean, we heard this on Fox News that there was this subpoena out, and I was going outside my front door looking around for somebody to serve me. And it turns out that it was an email that was sent to Code Pink co-founder Jody Evans, and it was so unofficial that it landed in her spam box. And she was looking for something else and just happened to find it. You'd think you'd get a certified letter in the mail or you'd get a subpoena server or something. So it was a letter, and it came from the Treasury Department, from the Office of Foreign Assets Control, known as OFAC. And I don't want to say it's not serious. It is serious because they're asking for all kinds of information. And this is a kind of intimidation tactic that means we have to get a lawyer, that we have to spend a lot of staff time, a lot of energy on answering about 12 very detailed questions that they're asking that include things like, how did you get there? Where did you stay? What did you do every hour that you were there? I guess we have to tell them how many hours we slept. There were 170 people, so I don't know if they want to know what every single person did every single minute of the day. What we brought, and we brought about $600,000 worth of aid. So it's a lot of information that they want. And of course, this is to make people think, uh-oh, should I go to Cuba? Uh-oh, should I keep doing humanitarian aid? And the answer to that is yes. We can't be intimidated. In fact, we have to use this as another reason that we're so angry at the U.S. government and redouble our efforts.
Well, Medea, it's such a shocking report, and Fox has been kind of like self-quoting. They release their report, then they report on the report that they released, and just kind of like generating their own media tornado in a sense. But, all of this kind of obscures and is trying to gloss over what was really happening, which is that you were on a humanitarian delegation. So, why did you go to Cuba in the first place? What did you witness on the ground? This was 2 months after the U.S. imposed the oil embargo, in a sense, oil blockade on Cuba. And it just seems kind of crazy because what the U.S. government is doing right now is treating the delivery license, legal delivery of humanitarian aid as something suspicious and even criminal.
Absolutely, Emily. You bring up very important points. One, everything we did was legal. We went there illegally. They forced us, to the U.S. government, to stay in the hotel we stayed in. And then they turn around and say, oh, you stayed in this fancy hotel. Well, there are hundreds of other hotels that are on the list where you cannot stay. There is an exemption for taking food and medicine. So that's what we did. Everything we did was legal. And I think, whoever is behind all of this, they know that it's legal. So it's just trying to, make our lives difficult. But also what you say, Emily, is so important, that we are doing the only moral thing that you can do in the light of a policy that is so unconscionable. And if we're going to stand by and watch while the U.S. Undertakes a program of collective punishment to make the lives of Cuban people so miserable that they will overthrow their government, we have no moral conscience as a people. And the people who are suffering the most are the babies, are the elderly. The infant rate has doubled. It used to be 4.0. That's 4 deaths per 1,000 live births. Mm-hmm. It was lower than it was in the United States because Cuba had such a good healthcare system. Now it is more than doubled. So that means that what the U.S. is doing is actually killing babies. And I don't know, I don't think, the listeners and the watchers of your program feel very good about a policy designed to kill babies, designed to make people miserable. What did we see when we were there? We saw how miserable people are. We saw that there are people who live in an apartment building who can't get water because the water needs electricity. We saw people who are living on 3 hours of electricity a day. We saw people who can't get to work because they have no transportation, or if they do get to work, there's nothing to do because there's no electricity. The U.S. is pulling the plug on the Cuban economy, and we can't stand by and let that happen.
I mean, it's just completely wild that the actual criminal activity here is starving a country. And they're basically trying to criminalize saving babies at this point. And to that, I want to play a recent clip from White House counterterrorism czar Sebastian Gorka. And it's a really revealing clip. So can we put that up on the screen?
We're going to label terrorists as terrorists. Whether it's cartels, whether it's jihadis, or whether it's, sadly, the Americans who are left wing who are radical, and because they subscribe to some anarchic, anti-fascist or radically pro-transgender ideology, think they can kill Americans, whether it's 6-year-old little baby children at the Annunciation Church and school, or whether it's your friend and my friend Charlie Kirk.
So there you have it. He's openly talking about targeting the left, anti-fascists, and basically progressive activists, somehow saying they're murderers and equating them with like Al-Qaeda. So I guess my question to you is, do you see this investigation as part of a broader effort by this administration to criminalize dissent and intimidate anti-war organizing and, you know, most importantly, brand dissidents as domestic terrorists in the U.S.?
Absolutely. And you know very well that what we care about is saving lives. We don't want to kill people anywhere in the world, and we don't want to see babies dying anywhere in the world or elderly people not having access to food. We don't want that anywhere. So, you know, we're just good, moral people, and they're trying to label us as terrorists or as pawns or as actually financed by some foreign government, whether it's the Chinese, at one point it was the Russians, at one point it was Chavez in Venezuela. You know, they're always trying to find a way to minimize the fact that the vast majority of people in Code Pink, for example, are volunteers. They're doing this on their own dime. The people that I'm with in Congress every day who go in to try to change U.S. policy, they're paying for their own lunches. They're paying for their own bus fare. I mean, everything is volunteer because they care about these issues. And we see how they're trying to criminalize us. There are members of Congress, including the head of the Intelligence Committee, Tom Cotton, who asked for us to be investigated, whether it's because we don't want to bomb Iran or because we don't want to genocide people in Palestine or we don't want to be bombing Lebanon. Whatever the issue is, they try to find a way to say that we are representing a foreign government. And, you know, the irony of all of that is that so many of the people in Congress are bought and paid for by a foreign government agency, which is AIPAC. They meet constantly with Netanyahu and other Israeli officials, and they represent a foreign government. We don't. And yet nobody is investigating them. On the contrary.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, a lot of people have pointed out the fact that far-right influencer Nick Shirley stayed in one of those hotels on the list of hotels that you cannot stay at and made it very public.
Stay in. It's a beautiful Hotel Nacional. I hope one day we can take a big group and all stay there.
Yes, but of course he did stay there while he was going on his kind of anti-Cuba tirade. But all that to say, you know, Medea, you of course have been involved in anti-war organizing for decades, you know, organizing against the war in Iraq, Afghanistan, you know, strong supporter for Palestine, Cuba, and beyond. Does this moment that we're facing right now with kind of renewed repressive acts against the left and the anti-war movement remind you of previous periods of repression against the anti-war movement? Or does this feel kind of qualitatively different or dangerous in some way?
It does feel qualitatively different. I mean, certainly I wasn't around during the 50s. I'm sure it felt like that. During the days of the Iraq War, for example, I mean, there were a lot of people who sent us hate messages, death threats, but they were not the government. It was individuals who said, oh, you're not supporting the troops, you're anti-American. Now it's the government. And it does feel very different. And, you know, we've seen what they've done to the students. We've seen what they've done to Palestinian Americans. We've been watching this. But, you know, your last guest, Omar, didn't want to leave on a negative note. And I don't either, because I think it's so important that we inspire each other to keep working on this. And we are now putting out a call for encampments over the summer in July and August, that people get together, whether it's outside a military base or it's outside of a a weapons industry, or it's just in any old place where you want to get together and create community and teach each other what we need to learn. And we want to focus on how we can really go against the $1.5 billion Pentagon budget that this administration is trying to pass, which is a 50% increase in what was already a ridiculously high $1 trillion budget. So we feel that we've got to get together, whether our main issue is the environment or the women's rights or issues around Black lives or whatever it is, Medicaid for all, Medicare for all. We need to all come together and talk about how we're going to effectively build a movement that confronts what we're facing right now. So I just want to put a plug. We're in the very beginning stages of this. And if anybody wants to join us in building a coalition and groups that will create their own encampments, no matter where they are, let's use this time to come together and build.
And in the in honor of not leaving on a negative note, I do want to ask you, we've seen some lawmakers, including I saw Congresswoman Delia Ramirez speak out in support of Code Pink and condemning this fascistic attack by the U.S. government on anti-war organizers who just don't want to see babies die. What has the broader response been like so far? Has there been significant solidarity and a kind of public backlash to this investigation?
We've certainly seen solidarity from people in different organizations, lots and lots of solidarity. I've heard from people I hadn't heard from in like 20 years. And they understand the whole issue of, first they came after the Palestinian Americans and they came after us, that this is an attack on all of us who are just trying to build a better country, a better world, a better society. So we've had a lot of solidarity. I haven't seen so much from members of Congress, but we do have a lot of friends in Congress, and they're all facing their own problems. I don't know if it's the moment for them to come out and say, let's all get together and support Code Pink. But more importantly, they are putting forth war powers resolutions to stop the U.S. government from invading Cuba. And there is a war powers resolution now in both the Senate and the House. And that is so important because we have to send these messages to Trump that he doesn't have the authority to invade Cuba, just like he didn't have the authority to invade Iran and got himself into a mess there. But maybe we can stop the U.S. invasion. And along with that, we have to stop these crippling sanctions, this naval blockade that is not letting any oil get to the island. In fact, I just heard that the Russian shipment that they were expecting, the second one, has just turned around. So it is important to support those members of Congress who are trying to stop the U.S. policy towards Cuba.
Well, Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Code Pink, and I gotta say, you were probably like the most committed anti-war activist. You're all over the place, especially in Congress, holding the powerful feet to the fire. So it's no wonder you have garnered the ire of all of these very powerful individuals who want zero dissent. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll keep people updated on this story. Really appreciate you, Medea.
Thank you, and thank you for Breakthrough News that really educates and mobilizes and inspires people.
Oh,
amazing.
Well, thank you to Medea. And seriously, every time I'm in DC, I don't even have to tell Medea I'm in DC. I just bump into her at literally any event against war, any event for helping people. And also, I mean, you'll always see her, showing up at events to disrupt, to make people who are in charge of this war machine feel incredibly uncomfortable. So, I mean, I'm not surprised this administration is coming after her the way they are, but it's just, like she said, it's like to have the U.S. government doing this, it's a scary thing, and it is meant to intimidate and to make people, feel like they might face criminal charges if they dare, go near an event that's trying to help babies in Cuba. from dying. Just completely backwards and insane. Zoe, I wanted to point out, I didn't get to throughout the show because we were so busy with all of our amazing guests. We had several people donate throughout the show, but they all donated anonymous. Thank you. I would thank you by name, but it says anonymous. Anonymous donated $20. Anonymous donated $5. So thank you for all of your donations. There's still time. We're still going here for you to donate during the live stream, if only to say happy birthday to me. But most importantly,
shout out.
Yeah, for those who weren't around in the beginning, yesterday was my birthday. So if you like what I do and if you like me, one way that you can honor my birthday is by donating to Breakthrough News, this independent media outlet that I am so privileged to get to be a part of, that doesn't have to, rely on funding from Larry Ellison or Lockheed Martin or Boeing or Northrop Grumman or Palantir or any of the other evil
Bitcoin
companies. And we can go on and on. Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin a company?
No.
Is that what we're saying? It's a company? But we're just girls. We don't know.
We don't know what crypto is.
We don't know what crypto is. We're just here to look pretty. But no, in all seriousness, thank you for all the birthday wishes. Thank you for all the support, you guys. You can also support us on a more regular basis by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news, where for as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. And Zoe, we also have some really exciting upcoming announcements. I know we've been teasing this for like a couple months now, but we're finally almost there. Next week, we will be making a really big announcement, in addition to other announcements about what we're going to be doing here at Breakthrough News, what you can expect from us moving forward. And one of those things that you can expect that we can tell you a little bit about is that we will be doing a live stream, a Breakthrough News live stream, 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 12 p.m. Eastern time. So we can cover the news more thoroughly, more consistently, more regularly. Because who wants once a week when you can have two?
Yeah. There's a lot of news happening. There's a lot of news happening.
Yeah, there's so much news happening that we have to do 2 days a week or else we can't cover it all. Ideally daily, maybe someday. But baby
we would
steps.
need
2 days a week.
We need more patrons for that.
Yeah.
If you want to see us more, donate more money.
Yeah. If you like me and Zoe, if you like looking at our faces, if you like hearing our voices, honestly, who wouldn't? Then go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. Yeah.
And shout out to our production team, without whom we wouldn't be able to do this. Shout out John and Emily in the booth, everyone else who's behind the scenes. We're all gonna be moving forward, giving you 2 shows, a lot of work. So please support me and Rania, support John and Emily, support the rest of the team. Become a patron. Throw money in that live chat.
I love the way if you become a patron, we will send you a exclusive voice note of Zoe calling it Patron. I love the way you say it.
Well, it's just like, are you a Patreon or are you a patron? It's just weird.
Yeah, no, it's a bizarre. I don't know how this caught on, but it works somehow. But also, yes, to what Zoe's saying, I mean, I saw somebody in the comments, and you guys, I do read the comments. Sometimes. I saw somebody in the comments as you were talking, Zoe, say that they were like, how about 24/7? How much would it cost to do 24/7? A lot. In order to bring you more breakthrough news, in order to do this more, we need to hire more video editors. We need to hire more production staff. We need to hire more of everything, actually, to make all that work. We need to expand our team. So baby steps, unless somebody wants to donate millions, baby steps.
We're open to that. We're not closing the door on that. Unless you're Larry Ellison, in which case, keep walking.
What if it's like a member of his family who has access to the family wealth but good politics and wants to use some of it to help us?
I think we'd assess that on a case-by-case basis.
All right. As long as there's no conditions attached.
Yeah, no conditions.
No conditions, so we can expand Breakthrough News, the Breakthrough News empire. Oh, we're not an empire. I'm just joking. We don't do that.
We're an institution right now.
Yes, an institution and an independent media institution. But in all seriousness, we can't do this without the support of our audience because that's how it works. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. Donate in the live chat. Make sure that you are smashing that like button, folks. It helps boost us in the algorithm. Make sure you're leaving comments, even if it's just to say hi. Engagement boosts us in the algorithm. And on that, we are so excited to come back to you next week with a bit of a new look and some announcements.
A bit of a new look.
But Zoe, I promise
no
we'll
accents.
Not. Actually, I think you should. I think that'd be interesting and not at all offensive to anyone, as long as it's not like a global South accent.
No. I only dabble in the Isles in the UK. I don't go beyond that.
I love it. Thank you everyone for tuning in, both in the US and around the world. And we will be back next week with some really exciting news.
Revolution!